This happened just last week, during my last full week at home before I left for university. My name is Mira, and for days I argued with myself about whether I should even put this into words. Part of me wanted to lock the memory away and pretend it never happened. Another part kept replaying the image of those carved marks and the sound of something scraping beneath the floor. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so here it is. My parents, Fareed and Aisha, moved into a smaller place after I finished high school. They'd been talking about downsizing for years, tossing around ideas about condos and townhouses, but it never felt real until the moving boxes started appearing. The house is on the fringe of a sleepy neighborhood called Willowbrook. Older maples, a cracked sidewalk, neighbors who know each other's birthdays. Because I was heading off to university, they finally decided to take the plunge. I'd only been to the new place a few times, enough for the usual polite tour and the cursory list of quirks older houses come with. When they showed me around that first day, my dad was proud of the place. "It's just the two of us now," he said, waving a hand at the modest living room. He pointed out the little things, the draft by the back door, the funny tilt of the second stair where the water shutoff is. One thing they were very clear about: there wasn't a basement. "Just a crawl space," Mom said, like that should be the end of the conversation. They sounded definitive, almost proud that they'd found something manageable instead of another 3-story fixer-upper. Because of that certainty, the house's underbelly never once registered on my radar. My parents left on a week-long trip the night before the week I was writing a few last essays and packing. They figured it was a great chance to relax before the semester started. I was supposed to be house-sitting and feeding their plants. Boring, safe, small responsibilities. The first night I heard anything off was a Tuesday. I was in bed, lights off, trying to let the hum of the fan drown out the textbooks in the other room, when a sound cut through the quiet, a steady, rhythmic tapping directly beneath my feet. At first I blamed the house. Old wood creaks, pipes sigh. Old houses make a list of excuses for every mysterious noise. The sound was measured, like someone gently thumping a cane against a plank. It held a steady rhythm and a steady volume, not the random cracks of cooling timber. I got out of bed and patted across the floor, pressing my ear to the boards. The tapping seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere beneath me. That's what unnerved me. My parents had told me there was only a crawl space under the house, no full basement. Nothing like a room where a person or animal could live. The idea of purposeful noise coming from below, a supposed crawl space, felt wrong in a way that went past mere worry. Eventually it stopped, and I managed to go back to sleep, rationalizing the way you do in the dark when your brain wants to keep calm. Maybe a raccoon, maybe a branch knocked something loose. The next night I heard it again, louder, closer. My chest tightened. By the third night, the sound had escalated. Tapping gave way to scraping, to something dragged across concrete. Imagine someone raking nails along the underside of the floorboards, a slow, frustrated scrape that would pause and then start again. It was methodical and almost impatient, as though whoever or whatever was making it had a purpose and a timetable. I lay in bed and tried to think of any explanation that matched what I knew about the house. The rational part of my mind insisted it must be something mundane. A hidden access hatch, a loose panel, the neighbors. But the sounds were too deliberate for that. The tapping and scraping sounded like work, the kind of small, private labor you do when you're building, fixing, or marking something for yourself. As the noise persisted in the dark, my stomach rolled with a new, colder possibility. Maybe my parents had been mistaken about the lack of a basement. Maybe there was a way in I hadn't been shown. The idea of someone living beneath our home, unnoticed, felt like a violation I couldn't name. The next morning, I called my dad and told him everything. His voice tightened. He asked practical questions, told me to check the crawl space for animals. The entrance is tucked under the porch on the side of the house, low, awkward, and old. I didn't want to go near it, but between the nagging in my head and my dad's worried tone, I felt cornered into checking. I crouched into the crawl space, the air thick with dust and the smell of old insulation, and crawled as far as I could with a flashlight. There were droppings and the usual signs of critters, nothing surprising for an old house. But no evidence of someone living there. No food wrappers, no makeshift bedding. My dad sounded relieved when I said so, told me not to worry, and that he and Mom would call their security guy when they returned. Relief lasted about 5 minutes. While walking the perimeter later, more out of nervous energy than intent, I noticed a stack of weathered construction materials tucked against the rear wall. Rotting lumber, a patch of tarpaulin, a sagging old storm door leaned face down and mostly concealed. I'd seen the pile before. Who wouldn't? It was the kind of thing you walk past and ignore. But that afternoon, I moved a piece of plywood aside and found, half hidden and painted over, a metal storm door. It had been shoved back and mostly forgotten, as if whoever used it didn't want it known. My hands actually shook as I pulled it free and pulled the latch. Concrete steps dropped into shadow. I stood on the threshold and felt the air change, cooler, damp, and carrying a faint sour smell. My flashlight sliced down the stairs. Someone had been living there. Empty cans, a dented thermos, a stack of newspapers, a blanket bunched in one corner. On the wooden support beams, there were carvings, notched tally marks, and crude, frantic sketches that looked like people or animals, but twisted, broken, angles where curves should have been. One pillow bore a series of scratches in a pattern like days counted off, and beside it, a drawing that made my throat close. Warped figures, faces with wide mouths, lines radiating like sunbeams, but uglier. I felt nausea and a new, ugly curiosity, the kind that makes you look longer than you should. The marks weren't accidental. They were deliberate, intimate even, as though someone sat here and left them for themselves, or for someone to find. I called my parents again. This time, their shock was real. They swore they'd never seen the door, never been told about steps. My dad asked, again and again, if anyone was down there when I'd checked. I said no. He hung up and told me they were cutting their vacation short and heading home. I bolted to a hardware store, bought a heavy-duty padlock, and came back to secure the door from the outside. Doing something tangible steadied me, at least at first. That night, not long after I'd locked the door, someone began pounding on it, hard, frantic raps that shook the porch. Whoever was down there banged, rattled, screamed some soundless frustration against the metal. I froze, breath shallow, every old horror movie image in my head deciding to audition. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it began. I edged to a window and watched the yard. A shadow moved. A hunched figure sprinting across the lawn and disappearing into the tree line. Too fast to be a neighbor, too shapeshifty to be a person you could describe when they were gone. I slept fitfully, if at all. The police came the next morning, boots echoing on the porch. They searched the basement, turned over every blanket and can, and found nothing. We filed a report. They increased patrols in the neighborhood. My parents came home, shaken and angry and apologetic all at once. They promised they would take care of the house and find out how long someone had been there. They installed new locks and an alarm and told me not to worry. but my parents' reassurances have a hollow ring when you picture the scratches and the drawings. How do you reassure someone after you've seen evidence that a stranger has been living directly beneath your feet? I left for university the next morning the way I'd planned. Suitcase zipped and heart not quite steady. They called me daily at first. Their voices were practical, talking about changing the locks, about cameras, about calling an electrician. A week later, nothing new has happened. No new scratches, no more tapping. But the memory of that basement lives in my head like an ache. I keep imagining what those drawings meant, why someone would mark time in that way, what they did with their days down there. I worry about who it was, about whether they knew more than the records showed, and about what had driven them to hide in a place like that. I don't know if I did the right thing by moving the door and telling the police. Maybe the person who left those marks was harmless in the end, a transient who found a warm shelter and left when they could. Maybe it was something worse. All I have are the sounds that scratched at my nights and the carvings on the wood that still look like accusations. I wanted to write this because telling it aloud makes it less heavy in my chest, but I'm also writing it because if anything else happens, anywhere near Willow Brook or in a house that feels like home, I want to be the person who notices what's under the floorboards before it notices us. If this gave you chills, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more terrifying encounters.